Um, a good afternoon to all of you. Um, I welcome you to the second class in the PT Marathon. And we were all very excited to witness your enthusiasm yesterday, and we hope to replicate the same impact today. Uh, my name is Ankit Sharma. I am a faculty at KSG. I'm also a lawyer by training, and I have expertise in constitutional law, parliamentary concepts, and governance. And the reason that I have been called upon to present this particular session is to uh, take up the important points about the subject of polity, focusing upon the prelims examination this year. Okay, so as I am given to understand that most of you are preparing for the prelims examination this year, and what my agenda, my profile has been to run what we have started calling a marathon session, which is the format in which we have initiated the conversation today. Okay. So, okay, with the subject of the Constitution of India, all of us are aware that the subjects in the previous years, the questions in the previous years have been increasing. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन संविधान का जो प्रश्न पत्र है पॉलिटी में वो एक स्तंभ है पॉलिटी का, जीएस पेपर का, प्रीलिम्स पेपर का. एंड वन गेट्स दी अंडरस्टैंडिंग कि अगर आपने संविधान के कॉन्सेप्ट्स को अच्छे से कमांड कर लिया है तो आपको एक कॉन्फिडेंस आ जाता है यूपीएससी प्रीलिम्स में 12 से लेकर 15 प्रश्नों का सही उत्तर देने का. It's a very simple observation in the UPSC exam then that if you master the Constitution of India, which is not a very difficult subject to master for the prelims, you have a set of questions which are predetermined every year, which are ranging from 12 questions to 15 questions. And if you are able to master some amount of basic concepts and some amount of what you can call करंट अफेयर्स अपडेटेड विद देम, संविधान के जो प्रश्न पत्र होते हैं पॉलिटी के अंदर उनमें आपको एक कॉन्फिडेंस मिल जाता है जीएस को एक अटेम्प्ट देने का. 15 क्वेश्चंस इज अ ह्यूज क्वांटम इन द जीएस, इन द पॉलिटी पेपर, इन द प्रीलिम्स पेपर. एंड द effort that I'm trying to invest today is to make sure that we can do a kind of the quickest crash course on the entire polity structure, as much as possible that I can cover, in which of course your cooperation is assumed and requested. तो ज़्यादा मतलब हम जो डिटेल्ड एनालिसिस हैं वो शायद नहीं कर पाएंगे इन स्ट्रक्चर्स में, लेकिन मैं कोशिश करूँगा कि जो भी करंट अपडेट्स हम डिस्कस करें उनके पीछे के जो फंडामेंटल फैक्टर्स हैं उनको जल्दी से क्रैश कोर्स के पॉइंट पे एक बार रिवाइज कर लें. ठीक है. मेरा आपसे थोड़ा अनुरोध रहेगा कि डोंट जस्ट सिट आइडली इन फ्रंट ऑफ दिस कंप्यूटर स्क्रीन. थिंक ऑफ दिस एज अ क्लासरूम सेशन जस्ट कंडक्टेड ऑनलाइन, एंड इट्स easier and better that you have a set of papers in front of you and a pen, and you can take running notes of certain information which I may be dispensing at a faster pace than usual. तो अगर आप एक कॉपी पेन लेके अपने साथ बैठेंगे टेबल पे तो it would become a little easier for you to document the things that I would be discussing orally in the class. Sometimes I may not be able to write everything on the board because of the paucity of time and the amount of things that we have to cover in the given time. So I would expect you to take notes upon things as if you were sitting in a classroom session. So think of it like a classroom session, just that it is a fast-paced classroom session and it will extend the normal duration of a classroom session. ठीक है. तो मैं बहुत सारे आर्टिकल्स वगैरह कवर करने की कोशिश करूँगा. आर्टिकल्स का एक फहरिस्त लूँगा, डायरेक्टली एक रिविजन के हिसाब से हम चीज़ों को कर सकते हैं. एंड वी विल ट्राई टू कवर एज मच एंड एज पॉसिबल द आर्टिकल्स ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया टू गेट अ गुड सेंस ऑफ रिविजन, अ काइंड ऑफ अ क्विक क्रैश कोर्स अपॉन द सब्जेक्ट ऑफ पॉलिटी फॉर द प्रीलिम्स एग्जामिनेशन. तो प्लीज़ आप अपने आप थोड़ा कॉपी और पेन अपने साथ लेके बैठिएगा और कुछ रनिंग नोट्स वगैरह लेने का थोड़ा सा आप एक प्रोजेक्ट रखिएगा, जिससे कि इट बिकम्स एन एक्सरसाइज इन विच यू कैन गैदर एज मच इन्फॉर्मेशन एज पॉसिबल, विच आई मे नॉट बी एबल टू डिस्प्ले ऑन अ पावर पॉइंट और माई सेल्फ राइट ऑन द बोर्ड. आई विल पॉसिबली लुक एट द camera and address you about a lot of things and explain you about a lot of things, but you should have the aptitude to write it out on a piece of paper as a matter of revising your own concepts from the GS classes, and also to take some current updates which I am going to in a way make you aware about. Okay. So having said that, let me just give you a sense of the structure that we are going to follow for this classroom, for this session. Okay. Now, one of the things which is an advantage for us in the polity paper, एक जो हमारे साथ एक एडवांटेज होता है पॉलिटी के लिए, प्रीलिम्स के लिए, मेंस के लिए, दोनों के लिए, वो ये है कि हम पॉलिटी को स्ट्रक्चर बहुत आसानी से कर सकते हैं. मतलब आपकी जो पढ़ाई है और जो आपका रिवीजन है उसके लिए स्ट्रक्चरिंग करना पॉलिटी का थोड़ा आसान रहता है अगर हम जो संविधान है उसकी तालिका से ही अपने स्ट्रक्चर्स को ड्रॉ करें. इफ़ यू आर ड्राइंग द स्ट्रक्चर्स डायरेक्टली फ्रॉम द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया as they are given in article 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if we stay tuned with the numerics of the constitution, ठीक है, अगर हम मतलब बिल्कुल संविधान की गणित के साथ चले तो उसके साथ ना याद करना और रिवाइज करना आसान हो जाता है. उससे आपको पता होता है कि आपने कितना याद कर लिया है, कितना आपका बचा है, और उससे रिवीजन करने में बहुत आसानी मिलती है. तो जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल मैं जो कहना चाह रहा हूँ वो ये है कि हम अगर कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को रिवाइज करना शुरू करेंगे तो वी विल जस्ट टेक वेरी ब्रीफ अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ द प्रीएम्बल ऑफ इंडिया. मैं बिल्कुल उसी लेवल पे प्रीएम्बल को डिस्कस करूंगा जहां पर आपके प्रीलिम्स के लिए एक फोकस्ड रिवीजन की ज़रूरत है. जो भी क्लासरूम सेशंस आपने किए हैं प्रीएम्बल के ऊपर, या फिर जो भी आपको लगता है कि विच इज़ गोइंग टू बी गुड अंडरस्टैंडिंग कि एमसीक्यूज़ कैसे बन सकते हैं प्रीएम्बल से. पिछले 2 वर्षों में, 3 वर्षों में हर बार एक प्रश्न एमसीक्यू आया है प्रीएम्बल के ऊपर, अलग अलग चीज़ों को परमिटेशन कॉम्बिनेशन में डाल के प्रीएम्बल. तो मैं जल्दी से प्रीएम्बल डिस्कस करूँगा. उसके बाद मैं शुरू करूँगा जो पहला भाग है कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का, विच इज यूनियन एंड इट्स टेरिटरी. और इसमें मैं बस आपको उतना ही आर्टिकल्स बताऊंगा जिसमें से कि आपका कोई एमसीक्यू बन के निकल सकता है. ठीक है, तो हमारा फोकस ये रहेगा कि ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा जो एमसीक्यू की एबिलिटी वाले आर्टिकल्स हैं संविधान के अंदर, उनको एक बार जल्दी से रिवाइज कर लें और उनके साथ अटैच्ड जो भी करंट अफेयर्स हैं या करंट अपडेट्स हैं उनको अपने साथ एक बार समझ लें कि उन करंट अपडेट्स के लेवल पे क्या डेवलपमेंट हुआ पिछले 1 से 1.5 साल के अंदर. ठीक है, तो जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल लेट्स से जब हम बात करते हैं किसी भी एक देश की या एक रिपब्लिक की, वी टॉक अबाउट व्हाट यू कैन कॉल इन प्रीएम्बल, we have of course a very simple understanding. The preamble is divided into 2 categories, or the information that is given in the preamble is divided into 2 categories. First, it talks about the nature of the state. It talks about the nature of the state. State का मतलब यहाँ पर जो हमको समझना है वो है राज्य. Okay, state not meaning the state मतलब जैसे कि प्रदेश, जैसे उत्तर प्रदेश या मध्य प्रदेश, बट राज्य मतलब जो राज्य करने वाली संस्था होती है एक समाज के अंदर, उसको स्टेट कहते हैं. और प्रीएम्बल में जो पहली चीज़ एक दे रखी है वो है कि हमारा जो भारत का गणतंत्र है, द रिपब्लिक ऑफ इंडिया, व्हाट इज द नेचर और द what you can call the specification of the Republic of India, what kind of a state is the Republic of India. ठीक है, तो इसमें जो पहली चीज़ दे रखी है प्रीएम्बल में, वी ऑब्वियसली नो, वी द पीपल ऑफ इंडिया हैविंग solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. ठीक है, बिल्कुल ही सिंपल सा एक इलेबोरेशन है. मैं इसके पीछे आपको बैकग्राउंड में नहीं जाऊंगा क्योंकि आपका ये ऑलरेडी जनरल स्टडीज़ की क्लास में पूरा हो गया है. बस मैं आपको इसमें 2-3 चीज़ें बता सकता हूँ जो कि प्रीलिम्स के लेवल पे आपसे क्वेश्चन में पूछी गई हैं पिछले वर्षों में. फॉर एग्जांपल, फर्स्ट थिंग वी अंडरस्टैंड इज दैट द इनिशियल ड्राफ्ट ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन एज इट वॉज मेड इन 1949 एंड विच केम इन टू इफेक्ट इन 1950 focused upon the 3 characters of Indian state. It was a sovereign, a democratic republic. ठीक है, SDR as we call it in an abbreviation. The Republic of India was initially granted as an SDR, the Sovereign Democratic Republic of India, and the idea was that the Indian, for example, if you take a look at your passport, it talks about the Republic of India, right? And if you talk about, for example, the nature of the Indian Republic, it can be understood that India is a sovereign republic and India is a democratic republic. तो कभी कभी प्रीलिम्स में ये प्रश्न आता है कि जो रिपब्लिक ऑफ इंडिया है उसके आगे जो विशेषण लगे हैं उनमें से कौन से सही हैं, राइट. सो व्हाट बेसिकली टॉक्स अबाउट इज व्हेन यू टॉक अबाउट सॉवरेन डेमोक्रेटिक रिपब्लिक, जो शब्द है सॉवरेन या जो शब्द है डेमोक्रेटिक, वो रिपब्लिक की विशेषता बताता है. वो ये बताता है कि हमारा रिपब्लिक विशेषकर किस प्रकार का रिपब्लिक है. तो इसका कहने का अर्थ है कि इंडिया इज़ अ सॉवरेन रिपब्लिक एंड इंडिया इज़ अ डेमोक्रेटिक रिपब्लिक. जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल हम थोड़ा सा कंपैरिजन करने के लिए कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का थोड़ा समझ सकते हैं. जब हम बात करते हैं चाइना की फॉर एग्जांपल, तो चाइना का जो अब्रीविएशन है वो है पीपल्स रिपब्लिक ऑफ चाइना, PRC, राइट. यहाँ पर पीपल्स का जो एक अर्थ है वो है इट्स अ काइंड ऑफ अ कम्युनिज्म, कम्युनिस्टिक रिपब्लिक ऑफ चाइना. जो लोगों की, जो लोक शक्ति का एक रिपब्लिक है वो चाइना है. भारत के लिए जो विशेषण यूज किया जाता है, द एडजेक्टिव दैट इज यूज्ड फॉर इंडिया इज दैट इट इज अ सॉवरेन डेमोक्रेटिक रिपब्लिक. तो अगर मान लीजिए आपके सामने कोई प्रश्न आता है कि भारत का जो रिपब्लिक है, द रिपब्लिक ऑफ इंडिया, व्हाट काइंड ऑफ स्पेशल पॉलिटिकल nature does the Republic of India enjoy? And what we say is that it is a sovereign republic, which means that India as a republic is free to take decisions upon its international policy, upon its foreign relations. It has a free will to engage into friendly relations with foreign countries and not engage in foreign countries. Sovereign means a kind of a what you can call a swechhata or a swadhinta in matters of international relations. And democratic republic means that the republic in India follows a special form of political theory, which is democracy. Okay, so for example, you obviously understand by the point that democracy means it's a government of the people, for the people, and by the people, right? As famously described by Abraham Lincoln, the Indian state has its central authorities as the legislative organs. For example, you have the Union Parliament at the center, and you have the state legislative assemblies at the state level, and the power centers of the Indian polity are populated by popular elections or direct elections, which are held to the Lok Sabha and the Vidhan Sabha. So that in a way represents the democratic nature of the Indian Republic. Okay, and what we understand by the nature of republic, okay, a very simple understanding of the nature of republic or the definition of republic is that republic is any form of government where the head of the state, is directly or indirectly chosen by the people. Directly or indirectly chosen by the people, right? So the political science definition of the term republic is with the head of the state. हेड ऑफ द स्टेट का मतलब होता है जो आपका राज्य अध्यक्ष होता है या राज्य प्रमुख होता है. अगर गवर्नर एक हेड ऑफ द स्टेट होता है प्रदेश के लेवल पर, तो उसको राज्यपाल कहते हैं. तो द वेरी सिंपल पॉलिटिकल साइंस डेफिनेशन ऑफ अ रिपब्लिक इज दैट द हेड ऑफ द स्टेट इज डायरेक्टली और इनडायरेक्टली chosen by the people. Sometimes that method of choice can be through elections. Okay, a democratic republic का मतलब होता है कि not only the head of the state but even the government and every other political organization in the polity of India is elected by the people directly or indirectly, right? And therefore the adjective that we use to define India is a democratic republic. Okay, यहाँ पर मैं आपको एक और लगा हुआ एक एस्पेक्ट बता सकता हूँ जो डिफरेंस कभी कभी प्रीलिम्स में जो पुराने क्वेश्चंस आए उसमें पूछा गया है कि व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन हेड ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट एंड हेड ऑफ द स्टेट. ये प्रश्न है जो थोड़ा सा घुमावदार प्रश्न है जहाँ पर पूछ सकते हैं आपसे कि इन दोनों के बीच में क्या अंतर होता है. हेड ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट इज बेसिकली द प्राइम मिनिस्टर. Prime Minister is in the leadership of the Council of Ministers, and the Council of Ministers plus the Prime Minister together are referred to as the Government of India. Right? The simple definition as given under Article 12 of the Constitution is of the government is the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. Prime Minister as the head of the Council of Ministers, as the leader of the Council of Ministers. Head of the state, on the other hand, is President. The way that the Indian polity is organized is that there is the president who is at the head of the state, and then there is the prime minister along with the council of ministers. Okay, and the president under Article 52 and Article 53 of the Constitution works on the aid and advice of the prime minister and council of ministers. ठीक है, तो इसका मतलब आप अपनी पॉलिटी के लेक्चर से याद कर सकते हैं कि जो व्हाट वी बेसिकली से इज दैट द इलेक्शंस ऑफ द प्रेसिडेंट ऑफ इंडिया आर undertaken by an electoral college, which is composed of the legislative assemblies of the state, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, and only the elected members of these bodies can represent themselves in the election of the president. Therefore, the head of the state in India is indirectly elected through an electoral college. But the head of the state, the president, is the head of the republic, right? He is the head of the state, which is the Republic of India. But the head of the state in India is a nominal authority, is a body which does not have any actual real political powers. The real political powers are vested in India in the head of the government. And the head of the government is the Prime Minister, along with the Council of Ministers, which come out of the Parliament of India, right? So this kind of a simple distinction has been asked previously in a UPSC previous year question with regard to the distinctions which are related to who is the head of the state and who is the head of the government. So I'll repeat it again. The head of the state is the President of India and the head of the government is the Prime Minister of India along with the Council of Ministers, right? Pradhan Mantri, uske saath saath jo Mantri Mandal hai, that is known as the Government of India, and the Republic of India is represented by the President of India. Okay. At this point of time, let me also take the opportunity to identify 3 simple terms which you can remember. See, all of these little data points, little facts which are, I'm throwing out, for example, the distinction between head of the government, etc., etc. These are all coming out of a good analysis of the previous year questions of the UPSC. Okay, तो UPSC इन छोटे-छोटे concepts पे कभी confuse करके कोई MCQ बना देती है, तो I am going to clarify each bit of things as I move about, जहाँ पर कि छोटे-छोटे महीन areas में UPSC can create a question for the prelims examination. For example, let's say, if we talk about the fact, what do we know as Union of India? Okay. So when we think about Union of India, we think about the Parliament of India, which is the Union Parliament, which includes the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, and we include within it the Government of India. Government of India जो होती है उसके अंदर आपका आता है Prime Ministers along with the Council of Ministers. ठीक है? So the Parliament of India, the Union, Parliament at the Union level and the government at the Union level, both of them come together and form what is known as the Government of India. And as you know that the Indian Constitution follows what you can call a formula of checks and balances, which means that the Parliament of India holds the Government of India to accountability. ये एक प्रश्न है जो बार-बार UPSC में पिछले 5 या 6 साल से आ रहा है, which is with regard to the accountability that the Parliament of India has towards the accountability that the Government of India has towards the Parliament of India. ठीक है, तो हमारा जो सिस्टम है वो इस वेन डायग्राम से एक तरह से आइडेंटिफाई किया जा सकता है जिसका नाम है checks and balances, the system of checks and balances, in which the Prime Minister and Council Ministers who are a part of the Government of India are accountable to the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, who are the Parliament of India, and both of them collectively are referred to as Union of India. Let's say, for example, if you have a case in the Supreme Court which says XYZ versus Union of India, आपने कभी ना कभी कोई केस पढ़ा होगा इस तरह का जहाँ पर लिखा होगा कि लेट्स से मान के चलिए कि अगर कोई श्याम दीवान वर्सेस यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया एक केस है, तो उसका मतलब है कि यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया इज़ अ पार्टी टू अ पर्टिकुलर मैटर. तो हम बात करते हैं कि यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया में क्या क्या इंक्लूड होता है. यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया में इंक्लूड होता है पार्लियामेंट और गवर्नमेंट. ठीक है, दोनों. उसके बाद हम कभी कभी बात करते हैं गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया की, GOI. गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया ऑलरेडी आइडेंटिफाई फॉर यू इज जनरली रेफर्ड टू एज द Prime Minister, the Council of Ministers, and then the various ministries under the Council of Ministers. So for example, आपका जो सारा मंत्री परिषद है, the मंत्रालय का जो आपका पूरा तंत्र है, you have the structure of the ministries, the Finance Ministry, the Home Ministry, the Defense Ministry, the International, the Ministry of External Affairs, etc. All of them plus the Prime Minister as the head of the government is known as the Government of India. But sometimes the Government of India also is referred alongside the Parliament. तो कभी कभी इसका कोई टेक्निकल आंसर नहीं है इस प्रश्न का कि गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया का क्या उत्तर होता है. कभी कभी गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया को आप यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया से इंटरचेंज कर देते हैं, लेकिन अगर आप बिल्कुल तकनीकी तरह से पूछें, इफ़ यू आस्क अ क्वेश्चन विच इज़ टेक्निकल इन नेचर, देन You can have the nature in which you are looking at the government of India is also the government of India includes the Prime Minister of India, the Council of Ministers, and the ministries and the administration which is working under the ministers respectively. Okay. Yes. So there's a statement made over here. Civil simplified. Of course, Parliament also consists of the President of India. Right. That is something that I was just about to point out. कि जब हम Parliament की बात करते हैं तो President of India. क्योंकि हम President of India की क्यों बात कर सकते हैं? क्योंकि यहाँ पर आप देखिए the Council of Ministers and the Prime Minister, both of them, as I pointed out, are working under the nominal leadership of the President of India. And since the Prime Minister and Council of Ministers are a part of Parliament, it is but natural that the President is also going to be a part of the Parliament. तो जैसे एक बार UPSC में प्रश्न आया था कि क्या भारत के राष्ट्रपति पार्लियामेंट का हिस्सा होते हैं कि नहीं, तो the correct answer to that is the President of India is a part of the Parliament of India. In fact, the Parliament of India has three components: the President of India, the House of the People, which is the Lok Sabha, and the Council of States, which is the Rajya Sabha. Right? So that's a correct observation over here. Okay. Now, moving on with this kind of a structure, I'll come back to some of the positions over here. Things that you can keep in mind. Number one, India is a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. The initial draft of the preamble with the Indian Constitution in 1949 and 1950 only use the term sovereign and democratic. The other terms, which is socialist and secular, were introduced into the Constitution by subsequent amendments made to the Constitution. तो पिछले से पिछले वर्ष एक प्रश्न आया था प्रीलिम्स एग्जामिनेशन में कि जो ओरिजिनल ड्राफ्ट है कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का, the original draft of the Constitution, which of the following adjectives were associated with the term republic in the original draft of the Constitution? And the correct answer was sovereign democratic republic. Socialist and secular, with sovereign socialist secular democratic republic, which is the current status of the Indian Constitution, was introduced in the Indian Constitution by subsequent amendments brought about by the Indira Gandhi government. Okay, so that's one part that we have to understand in the preamble with regard to the structure of the state. Okay, the second thing that we take a look at the preamble is, of course, the rights which are given to the citizens. Okay, what are the rights which are given to the citizens? Right, so जैसे मैंने आपको बताया था कि preamble है वो दो चीज़ों की बात करता है. एक तो बात करता है कि state की परिभाषा क्या है, what is the nature of the state in India. ठीक है, तो state की बात करता है what is basically the nature of the ruling power in India. Okay, the second thing that it talks about is, of course, that what is the rights given to the citizens of India. ठीक है, कोई भी एक पॉलिटिकल साइंस का डॉक्यूमेंट होता है, एनी काइंड ऑफ अ डॉक्यूमेंट विच इज अ डॉक्यूमेंट ऑफ पॉलिटिकल साइंस और पॉलिटिकल थ्योरी इज डिवाइडेड इनटू टू कैटेगरीज, द रूलर्स एंड द रूल्ड, the governor and the governed, right? And what we are basically looking at is that the preamble in a way gives the nature of the governor, the ruler, and the nature of the governed, and in a way it tries to balance the interaction between the two. तो जो second चीज़ जो preamble देता है वो देता है citizens के बारे में, the rights which are given with regard to the citizens of India, right? And the rights which are mentioned in the preamble are justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Right, a fraternity के अंदर ही you have two special rights which are given, which is unity of India, a balance between unity of India and dignity of the individual. Unity of India and the dignity of the individual. ये दो rights दे रखी हैं आपकी, justice, equality, liberty और fraternity के साथ साथ unity of India and dignity of the individual. ठीक है, अगर हम justice की बात करें तो justice का जो elaboration है वो किया गया है into these three parts. The first kind of justice which the Constitution preamble talks about is social justice. The second kind of justice which the Constitution talks about is economic justice. And the third kind of justice which the Constitution talks about is political justice. कभी कभी prelims के examination में ये order में पूछ ली जाती हैं. Now, for example, let's say a question can come in the prelims examination as to which is the correct order in which the justice principle in the preamble is organized. So they can give you one option, social, economic, political, option number 1. They can give you another option, economic, political, social, option number 2. Then they can give you another example, political, social, economical, option number 3. So you know, for example, if this kind of a question is asked, you have to answer social, economic and political justice is the correct order in which the categorization of justice has been given in the preamble. Okay, so for example, the question that we are asking, for example, is this, that when Ambedkar was putting the point of justice in the preamble, he very categorically made a point about it in the Constituent Assembly, that it is impossible to have political justice in a country like India without having social justice and economic justice, right? And that is why Ambedkar's name is very closely associated with the activities of social justice. For example, specifically the provisions in Article 15 and Article 16 about affirmative actions, right? So you have social, economic and political justice. अगर इस तरह का कोई प्रश्न आए तो आप इससे थोड़ा सा ध्यान में रखिएगा. उसी तरह से अगर हम बात करते हैं इक्वालिटी की, तो संविधान में जो इक्वालिटी के दो पार्ट दे रखे हैं, द टू पार्ट्स विच आर गिवन इन द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन अबाउट इक्वालिटी आर इक्वालिटी ऑफ स्टेटस एंड इक्वालिटी ऑफ अपॉर्चुनिटी. ठीक है, अवसर की आज़ादी और औहदे की आज़ादी, इक्वालिटी ऑफ स्टेटस एंड इक्वालिटी ऑफ अपॉर्चुनिटी. Okay, to have samanta in status, there's kind of a that no one shall be discriminated on sociological grounds, on the race, on the nature of caste or color or creed or place of birth or descent or gender. Any kind of a discrimination on the basis of a sociological phenomenon is a violation of equality of status. And equality of opportunity entails that every person shall be given equal opportunity, specifically in matters of public employments. मतलब पहले क्या होता था कि जो भी व्यक्ति किसी भी तरह से जो स्टेट के नज़दीक रहता था, जो स्टेट के आसपास रहता था, स्टेट के चापलूसी में रहता था, उसी को सारे पब्लिक एम्प्लॉयमेंट्स में थोड़ा सा प्रमोट किया जाता था. इट कुड हैव बीन पीपल फ्रॉम अ सर्टेन रेस, सर्टेन कास्ट, सर्टेन कम्युनिटी एट्सेट्रा. बट आर्टिकल द वैल्यू इन प्रियम्बल ट्राइज टू ब्रेक द शैकल्स एंड इट ट्राइज टू एस्टैब्लिश इक्वालिटी ऑफ अपॉर्चुनिटी इन पब्लिक एम्प्लॉयमेंट फॉर ऑल पीपल एंड नॉट have employment at the level of public administration and civil services be selected for a reserved few who were belonging from elite communities or castes or a group of people, right? तो ये दो बात करती है इक्वालिटी का. उसके बाद हमने फ्रेटर्निटी की बात कर ली, यूनिटी ऑफ इंडिया एंड डिग्निटी ऑफ द इंडिविजुअल. ठीक है, तो अगर आप इससे देखेंगे तो इससे आपके जो प्रीलिम्स के क्वेश्चन है वो कुछ इस प्रकार से आ सकते हैं. पहली कि जो भारत का जो स्टेट है उसके वो क्या है, विशेषण क्या है, what are the adjectives of the Indian state, right? And again I'm going to tell you that the term adjective means what is the visheshata of Indian state, right? So for example, Ram is a good boy. A good is a adjective to what a boy is, right? In a similar manner, India is a republic, but India is a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and out of this, sovereign, democratic republic terms were used in the initial draft of the preamble, but later on it was changed to a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic preamble in the subsequent amendments made to the constitution. ठीक है, तो preamble से आपके जो prelims के अभी तक के जो प्रश्न आए, मैंने वो almost सारे previous year के questions आपके मतलब जो प्रॉब्लम्स थे वो सारे हमने एक बार जो भी प्रीवियस ईयर के क्वेश्चन से प्रीएम्बल से मैंने हल्के से हाईलाइट करके आपको समझा दिया. मेरा फिर भी आपसे अनुरोध है, आई रिक्वेस्ट यू टू सिट विद अ पेन एंड पेपर एंड मेक श्योर दैट यू हैव द एबिलिटी टू जॉट सम ऑफ दीज थिंग्स डाउन, बिकॉज वी आर गोइंग टू मूव एट अ पेस विच इज़ नॉट ऑर्डिनरी. तो थोड़ा थोड़ा जल्दी अगर हो रहा है तो आप कुछ जॉट करते रहेंगे तो आपकी मेमोरी में कहीं ना कहीं चीज़ें कमिट होती रहेंगी. ओके, नाउ वी कम टू व्हेन वी हैव अंडरस्टूड प्रीएम्बल ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. Let me, for example, say another thing which was asked in the prelims paper previously. Preamble is sometimes also known as the key to open the minds of the constitution makers. Okay? मतलब अगर ये बात सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने कही है कि if at any point of time the Supreme Court is not able to interpret the constitution, the Supreme Court's final role as a constitutional court is to interpret what is written in the constitution, which means that what is not written directly but what is indicated by the constitution. For example, the Supreme Court could interpret the basic structure doctrine from Article 368 of the constitution, Supreme Court has said that any point of time when Supreme Court finds it difficult to understand what the constitution makers would do in a position of a constitutional crisis, it looks at the values which are given in the preamble and it tries to read the mind of the makers of the constitution by reading the values given in the preamble. Therefore, it is also known, termed by the Supreme Court as the key to open the minds of the constitution makers. एक prelims का प्रश्न इस पे बन सकता है to verify, to in a way specify. For example, you can have a question, which of the following phrases specify the preamble? A key to open the mind of the constitution makers would be the correct answer. बाकी 3 answers आपको fictitious बना सकते हैं, आपको confuse करने के लिए. ठीक है, ठीक है. आपने जो बात कही थी वो लिबर्टी की थी. हाँ, लिबर्टी मैंने यहाँ पर आपको नहीं बताई थी, सॉरी मुझसे मिस हो गया लिबर्टी. हाँ, थैंक यू फॉर रिमाइंडिंग मी. Liberty which has been given in the preamble is an interesting value, and liberty in the preamble is given as thought, expression, belief, faith and worship. इसको आप अभी थोड़ा सा नोट करके रखिए. जब मैं आर्टिकल 19 पे आऊँगा तो मैं इस पर थोड़ा सा एलैबोरेट करके आपको एक याद करने का फॉर्मूला बताऊँगा. The kind of liberties which have been given in the constitution, sorry I missed out writing about the liberty part. The kind of liberty which has been given in the preamble includes a thought, expression, belief, faith and worship. By the time I come to article 19(1), I will take a relook at this part of the preamble. ठीक है, तो अभी बस मैं आपको इतने विशेषणों के साथ छोड़ देता हूँ. जस्ट प्लीज़ आप इस सेशन को ऐसे लीजिएगा कि आप कहीं भी कुछ भी कर रहे हो, आप कोशिश करिए कि आप अपने आप को इस सेशन के माध्यम से अपनी रिविजन को एक तरह से एम्पावर करें. द फैक्ट ऑफ दिस सेशन इज नॉट जस्ट टू गिव यू इन्फॉर्मेशन बट ऑल्सो टू यूज माई वॉइस एंड दिस एंटायर सेटअप एज अ एक्टिविटी टू रिवाइज थिंग्स इन योर हेड फ्रॉम द टॉप टू द बॉटम. वी आर मूविंग फ्रॉम द फर्स्ट पार्ट ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन एंड विल ट्राई टू गो एज फार ahead as possible for the prelims examination. ठीक है, तो अभी हमने जो रिविजन किया वो प्रियम्बल का किया. ठीक है, उसके बाद हम देखते हैं कि अब जब हमने प्रियम्बल एक बार कवर कर लिया, द फैक्ट दैट वी हैव सीन प्रियम्बल टू बी द की टू ओपन द माइंड ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन मेकर्स, what we are going to take a look at after the preamble is the what you can call the Constitution of India. Now one thing that we have covered is the preamble. ठीक है, यहाँ पर मैंने एक डॉक्यूमेंट है, बस एक ही डॉक्यूमेंट में आपको दिखाऊंगा, द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया, which is something that I am going to refer to now and then to read certain articles of it. तो अगर हम मान लीजिए कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया के इंडेक्स में जाएं तो कभी कभी जो प्रश्न आते हैं कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया के इन चीज़ों से पूछ लिए जाते हैं. हालांकि आई विल बी वेरी क्लियर इन स्टेटिंग दैट इन द प्रीलिम्स एग्जामिनेशन नंबर ऑफ आर्टिकल्स आर नॉट आस्क्ड. ठीक है, नो क्वेश्चन हैज बीन आस्क्ड दैट हैज़ अ reference to which article does this kind of a thing apply under. So don't be under the obligation of remembering article numbers. Article numbers are not asked in the prelims examination. You can write article numbers in the mains examination out of your own willfulness to get better marks, but generally speaking in the polity examination the number of the article is not relevant. Okay, you can add relevance to the mains examination by memorizing some of them, but overall they are not relevant. Okay, so what we talk about basically in the Constitution of India is what are the essential components of a state. एक बार prelims में question आया था 2021 में, what are the essential components of a state, and generally we answer this question like this. A state must have the following components. Number 1, it must have a territory. ये आपका पॉलिटी का क्वेश्चन था 2021 का. State must have a territory, then it must have a population, then it must have the ability to take decisions of its own, basically what you can call a free foreign policy, right? And then it must have a structure of governance. These are the 4 components which are given in a political theory textbook as essential components of a state. It must have a territory, it must have a population, it must have a free foreign policy, meaning it can control its territory according to its own wills and control its populations according to its own wills without the obligations from an outside state, and it must have a structure of governance. Okay, now if we apply this very definition to the Constitution of India, we can find the Constitution of India being divided into these parts. Part 1 of the Constitution talks about union and its territory, right? तो मतलब ये आपको बताता है कि जो भारत उसकी भूमि कहाँ पर है, what is the territorial demarcation of India, right? That's basically what the part 1 of the Constitution talks about. The territorial circumspection in which you call India, the land of India, the Bhumi of India, right? And for example, you have within this the legendary article, which is the name and the territory of the union, which is India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. That's given in Article 1 of the Constitution. Okay. Now, this particular part 1 of the Constitution, which includes union and its territory, is just something that you can remember as the first part of the Constitution. अगर कभी मान लीजिए पूछ लिया गया कि पार्ट जो है कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का पार्ट 1 या आर्टिकल 1, क्योंकि इट्स अ बिट ऑफ अ लेजेंडरी आर्टिकल ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, व्हाट डज इट से, यू कैन आंसर अ क्वेश्चन लाइक दिस, बट दो द आर्टिकल्स एज नंबर्स आर नॉट जनरली आस्क्ड इन द प्रीलिम्स पेपर. पार्ट 2 ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन talks about population, as it talks about the concept of citizenship. तो आपको मैं बस एक भूमिका बता रहा हूँ कि किस तरह से आप संविधान को आसानी से याद कर सकते हैं रिवीजन के तौर पे. पहले हमने बात करी थी प्रियम्बल की. प्रियम्बल का जो फिलोसॉफिकल डॉक्यूमेंट है, वैल्यू बेस्ड डॉक्यूमेंट विच डिस्क्राइब्स द नेचर ऑफ द स्टेट एंड द पीपल ऑफ अ सिचुएशन. आफ्टर दैट यू टॉक अबाउट व्हाट यू कैन कॉल द लैंड ऑफ इंडिया, राइट? एंड द लैंड ऑफ इंडिया is the territory of India, Article 1 to 4, Part 1 of the Constitution. Once you have ensured for you the land of India, then you have to talk about the population of India. Who are the people of India? And that is why you have Article 5 to 11 as the second part of the Constitution, which is known as population, or what you can generally understand is who should be granted citizenship and what are the laws which are governing citizenship, right? So in this regard, obviously you have to reflect back from what you can call the Citizenship Act, which has been made by the Parliament and has been amended from time to time, which is, I'm sure, covered in your general studies, to get a look about what is the nature of citizenship which the Indian state grants. Okay. Then we take a look at the next part, which is Part 3 of the Constitution. Now, Part 3 of the Constitution talks about state, and let's say, for example, I'll just elaborate, because Part 3 of the Constitution is one of the most intensive parts from which questions are asked. So I'll just make an elaboration upon this. You have Part 3 of the Constitution. Okay, Part 3 से डायरेक्टली क्वेश्चन पूछे जाते हैं. Part 3 एक ऐसा पार्ट है जहाँ पर आर्टिकल के नंबर भी पूछे गए हैं कभी कभी, और कभी कभी उनकी कैटेगरीज में मिक्सचर करने की कोशिश की गई है. ठीक है. सो जब हम बात करते हैं इन चीज़ों की कि व्हाट आर बेसिकली द Part 3 ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट इन Part 3 ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन आर्टिकल 12, विच डिफाइंस द स्टेट. ठीक है, मतलब आर्टिकल 12 विच डिफाइंस द स्टेट विच इज राज्य. ठीक है, दिस इज द ओरिजिन. मतलब फॉर एग्जाम्पल, इफ यू हैव अ क्वेश्चन इन द प्रीलिम्स एग्जामिनेशन एज टू फ्रॉम विच आर्टिकल कैन द डेफिनेशन ऑफ स्टेट बी ड्रॉन, you have Article 12 of the Constitution. Article 12 of the Constitution defines a state, but also Article 12 of the Constitution is also the genesis of two concepts in the Constitution of India. One concept from which the one of the basic feature of the Constitution is derived is the Article 12 of the Constitution, separation of powers. If one, for example, asks a question ki which is the article in the Constitution from which one can deduce that basic that India follows a what you can call a model of a basic feature of the Constitution, a model of separation of powers of the Constitution, and the answer to that question would be Article 12, which is the definition of state. Okay, and the other idea which is given in Article 12 is the idea of a distribution of powers. ठीक है, तो बेसिकली आर्टिकल 12 क्या कहता है? आर्टिकल 12 कहता है कि जो भारत का राज्य है उसको आप इस तरह से समझ सकते हैं. यू कैन ड्रॉ काइंड ऑफ एक्स एक्सिस वाई एक्सिस फॉर्मेट टू अंडरस्टैंड द what you can call the nature of the government of the state of India. Okay, for example, over here you can write union, over here you can write state. State matlab you can write state over here as Pradesh. ठीक है, and union you can write over here as the Kendra, right? The union and the state, and over here you can write the legislative, and over here you can write the executive. ठीक है, तो आप देखेंगे अगर आप इस x एक्सिस और y एक्सिस के स्ट्रक्चर को देखें तो आर्टिकल 12 की डेफिनेशन आपके सामने आ जाएगी. आर्टिकल 12 ये कहता है कि द स्टेट अंडर आर्टिकल 12 means the legislative organ at the union एंड द एग्जीक्यूटिव ऑर्गन एट द यूनियन। ठीक है, तो इन दोनों की बात करता है, दैट द स्टेट इंक्लूड्स द लेजिस्लेटिव ऑर्गन एट द यूनियन एंड द एग्जीक्यूटिव ऑर्गन एट द यूनियन। ठीक है, ये बिल्कुल भाषा है इसकी जो मैं आपके लिए संक्षेप में, आई एम जस्ट ट्राइंग टू डिस्टिल इट डाउन। द स्टेट एट द यूनियन लेवल इंक्लूड्स द पार्लियामेंट ऑफ इंडिया and the government of India. Okay, the Parliament of India and the Government of India. And similarly, the state at the state level, मतलब प्रदेश level, आप state के repeated use से confuse मत हो जाइएगा. State at the state level means the legislature at the state, which includes the Vidhan Sabha and the Vidhan Parishad. Yes, state legislative assemblies and the government at the state. तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल यहाँ पर हम लिख सकते हैं कि अगर हम बात करें मध्य प्रदेश सरकार की, द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ मध्य प्रदेश एंड विधानसभा ऑफ मध्य प्रदेश, तो यहाँ पर आ सकता है। तो आप देखिए, इफ यू टेक अ लुक एट दिस वेरी सिंपल XY चार्टिंग आउट ऑफ द आइडियाज, यू हैव 4 concepts or 4 ideas which have been given. You have the concept of what you can call separations of powers between executive and legislative. ठीक है, जिसका बात करते हैं Parliament of India and the Government of India. And then you have the distribution of powers between the Union and the state, which means that the Union Parliament and the Union Government and the State Legislative Assembly and the State Government. ठीक है, तो ये जो इस मैट्रिक्स में कहीं पर भी कोई भी चीज़ अगर फॉल करती है तो उसको स्टेट की परिभाषा में इंक्लूड किया जाएगा. दिस इज व्हाट बेसिकली आर्टिकल 12 ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन से. जस्ट टू गिव यू अ रेफरेंस अगेन, आर्टिकल 12 ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इज द जेनेसिस ऑफ द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर्स, एज इट separates the powers between the legislative and the executive, and also it is the genesis of the concept of the distribution of powers, and in a way it lays down the structure in which the entire Indian network of state is identified. Okay, so for example, you have the states at the level of what you can call, you have the state government and the state legislature, and you have the union government and the union legislature, and all of these combined together are a part of what is known as state under article 12 of the constitution. Yes, of course, Shubham is correct absolutely to say that the union territories are also a part of the government of India and the Union of India. So the union territories generally, because they don't have an identification as a third form of the state, are included within the Union of India. The Union Parliament has the power over the union territories, and the Union government has the power over union territories. It can of course devolve certain powers to the union territories, but generally speaking, UTs are not a third entity of the state. They are not a third tier of the government. They are just basically what you can call extension to the powers of the union government. However, there is a third tier to the government, which is the local government. Okay, this is given in the constitution. Local government, which is the 3 parts of local government are the cooperative societies, the panchayats, and the municipalities. ठीक है, so this was added into the constitution by an amendment act in which the cooperative societies, panchayats and municipalities have been added into the structure of the state, which includes the local government and local authorities. Okay, we'll come to that and we'll discuss that as we proceed in that direction in the constitution. ठीक है, तो article 12 for example, let's take a look at article 12 very quickly to get you a sense of it, क्योंकि article 12 से पहले directly questions पूछे जा चुके हैं prelims के पेपर में. इसमें जो चीज़ें पढ़ने लायक है हम एक बार इनको पढ़ लेते हैं. Take a look at this. In this part, unless the context otherwise requires, the state includes the government and parliament of India and the government and legislature of each of the states and all local or other authorities within the territory of India under the control of the government of India. Take it, this includes the union territories, right? So you, for example, let's say if I have to identify this over here, the state includes the government and parliament of India. तो government का मतलब होता है executive branch, as I have pointed out earlier. Parliament का मतलब होता है legislative branch, और जो ऑफ इंडिया का मतलब होता है यूनियन। तो आप इसको मैट्रिक्स से अलाइन करके देख सकते हैं। द एग्जीक्यूटिव एंड द लेजिस्लेचर ऑफ द यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया एंड द एग्जीक्यूटिव एंड द लेजिस्लेचर ऑफ ईच ऑफ द स्टेट्स। तो आपको मैंने जो एक्स और वाई एक्सिस की जो प्रीमाइस बताई थी उससे आप देख सकते हैं। दिस इज बेसिकली व्हाट इट इज रेफरिंग टू इन टर्म्स ऑफ द इंडिकेशन ऑफ द स्टेट्स। ठीक है, तो ये दिस इज बेसिकली व्हाट यू कैन टेक अ लुक एट इन टर्म्स ऑफ अंडरस्टैंडिंग द डेफिनेशन ऑफ स्टेट। उसके बाद हम आर्टिकल 13 पे पहुंचते हैं ऑफ द कॉन्सेप्ट्स ऑफ टू थिंग्स विच आई विल डिस्कस वेरी सिंपली एंड वेरी ब्रीफली। फर्स्ट थिंग इज जुडिशियल रिव्यू। ठीक है, मैं आपको जुडिशियल रिव्यू की जो परिभाषा है बिल्कुल जल्दी से रिवाइज करा देता हूं, बिल्कुल पॉइंट बाय पॉइंट, कि जुडिशियल रिव्यू का अर्थ क्या होता है। स्टेट का काम होता है लॉ बनाना और पॉलिसी बनाना। ठीक है, द वर्क ऑफ द पार्लियामेंट इज टू मेक लॉ एंड द वर्क ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट इज टू मेक पॉलिसी, or let's say the work of the parliament is to make law and policy, and the work of the government, which is the executive, is to implement law and policy. Okay, now article 13 of the constitution talks about the fact that the law and the policy made by the government has to be subjected to certain review, a certain scrutiny. Okay, so it basically very simply says that if any of the laws which are made by the state, if they are in violation of any of the rights mentioned in part 3 of the constitution, which are also known as the fundamental rights, they shall be subjected to the review by the judiciary. And if the judiciary finds out that the violation or what you can call the subjugation of these rights is done by the state, it can strike down the law and the policy as unconstitutional. This power has been given to the judiciary by article 13. So for example, if you have a question as to does the Constitution of India explicitly define a judicial review, the answer is no. But does the Constitution of India indicate that there is judicial review? The answer is yes, and that article is article 13 of the Constitution, because article 13 of the Constitution states, and I am going to be specific about it, that any of the laws made by the state after the commencement of the Constitution, state meaning state as defined under article 12 of the Constitution, any of the laws made by the state after the commencement of the Constitution or made by the state which was existing before the commencement of the Constitution, they are going to be subjected to judicial review by the constitutional courts, which includes the High Court and Supreme Court, on the touchstone of them breaking the fundamental rights. So if any of the laws are inconsistent or in abrogation with the fundamental rights, if there are any laws which are inconsistent with or in abrogation of fundamental rights, then they are going to be struck down by the judiciary as unconstitutional under the powers given to judiciary under article 13 of the Constitution. Okay, so one thing that you have to very specifically notice is that article 12 defines the state and includes two organs of the states. In separation of powers, you have the legislative organ and the executive organ. But article 12 does not include judiciary into it, indicating the independence of judiciary, right? Because judiciary is supposed to be independent from the state. It is not included in the definition of state under article 12. On the other hand, because judiciary is supposed to be independent of the state and it is to scrutinize the activities of the state, it has the power to review the lawmaking, what you can call the laws made by the state and the policies made by the state. It has to be demarcated as separate, as independent of the state, and therefore the birth of judicial review comes under article 13 of the Constitution. I'll repeat it again. Article 13 of the Constitution states that any law which is made in the territory of India, that is Bharat, under article 1, before the commencement of the Constitution or after the commencement of the Constitution by the state as defined under article 12, shall be declared as unconstitutional if it is inconsistent or in abrogation with any of the rights mentioned in part 3 of the Constitution. And from article 14 onwards, you have the mention of the rights in part 3 of the Constitution, right? So before we move to the basic idea of fundamental rights, we have to understand two important elements which have to be described before we move into the quality or the nature of fundamental rights. One is the state which is the law making and law implementing organ of the Union of India and the Government of India, and the Union of India and the Government of the states. And the activities of the states have to be reviewed by the judiciary, and the powers of the judiciary to review the activities of the state can be drawn from Article 13 Clause 1 and 13 Clause 2 of the Constitution of India. So for example, if I have to represent it just very simply diagrammatically, you have the state over here, which is under Article 12. Okay, under Article 12 you have the state. Okay, then let's say for example you have the what you can call a judiciary. Which is under Article 13, and with judiciary you have what you can call a judicial review. Okay, and then after that, following on, you have the rights of the citizens or persons, you can call them. Okay, some rights are for citizens, some rights are for persons. So for example, you have Article 14 to 18, which is the fundamental right of equality. Then you have Article 19 to 20, the fundamental right of liberty. Then you have Article 23 to 24, right against exploitation. And you have Article 25 to 28, rights of freedom of conscience, etc. These are rights which are given to individuals. Okay. So for example, over here you have the ruler. Okay. Over here you have the ruled. And over here you have the custodian of the Constitution. And the role of the custodian of the Constitution, which is the judiciary, is to review the acts of the ruler. Let's say for example, if there are certain acts of the rulers which are, let's say for example, if judiciary has made some law which is in contravention to the fundamental rights. Let's say for example, if judiciary has made a law which is in contravention to the fundamental rights. This particular law can be annulled by the judiciary. If the state has made a law which is in contravention to the fundamental rights, this particular law can be annulled by the judiciary. If the state has made any policy or any decision which is against the fundamental right of an individual, the judiciary can annul these fundamental rights or these actions of the state. Right? तो आपको इसको इस तरह से देखना होगा कि स्टेट और इंडिविजुअल के बीच में इंडिविजुअल की फंडामेंटल राइट्स को प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए जुडिशरी हैज बीन एस्टैब्लिश्ड. आर्टिकल 12, आर्टिकल 13 and article 14 onwards, which are a specification of the fundamental rights. Okay, clear? I hope I'm making this sense very clearly in terms of understanding the point about it. Okay. So let's say for example, you have the question about what you can call the role of the judiciary, which is given under Article 13, is to review the decisions made by the state either as laws or as policies or as orders or as regulations, etc., which can be subjected to a judicial review. Okay, clear? So this is basically what we're looking at Article 12 and Article 13. Another concept which is imbibed in Article 13 of the Constitution is known as the doctrine of severability. Okay, so the concept of judicial doctrines is somewhat relevant in the prelims paper some of the times. So we'll take a little bit of a look at some of the doctrines which are given with the context of polity. For example, we'll take a look at doctrine of severability, we'll take a look at doctrine of eclipse, we can take a look at the doctrine of harmonious construction. Very briefly, I will give you a sense of what these judicial doctrines imply. Okay, let's say for example, when I talk about doctrine of eclipse or doctrine of severability, this is the first thing. Please be very quick about taking notes upon these. As soon as I'm just going to explain them very quickly. So as soon as you can, just take a note of them mentally or in a notebook. Okay. You have the question is what is the meaning of a custodian? Meaning of a custodian is someone who is in custody of something. For example, let's say if there is a bank and the custodian of the money which is kept in the bank is the bank manager or the branch manager, which basically means it is the responsibility of the branch manager to make sure that no money is stolen from the bank vault. Similarly, when we talk about custodian in terms of polity, a custodian in terms of the Constitution, the custodian of the Constitution is Supreme Court, which means that the intent and the essence of the Constitution has to be kept alive and it has to be materialized in reality. That responsibility is given in the Constitution to the Supreme Court of India. So what we basically say is that the custodian is the what you can call the final authority which is responsible for making sure that the spirit and letter of the Constitution is implemented and realized. Okay, so the savior of the Constitution, the custodian of the Constitution, the guardian of the Constitution, these are terms which are referred to for the Supreme Court. Also the final interpreter of the Constitution. Okay, so you have for example, these bots, let's say if I take a look at what is known as the doctrine of severability. The doctrine of severability is given under Article 13. It simply states this, and I'm going to explain this very briefly to you. Let's say, for example, if a law has been made by the state, okay, if the state has made a law, which is basically, let's say, law has been made by the Union Parliament. Let's say, for example, you have the data protection law. Data protection law has been made by the state, by the Union Parliament. Let's say, for example, Section 5 and Section 11 of the data protection law are appearing to be in contravention to certain fundamental rights. Let's say, for example, they are in contravention with Article 21 of the Constitution. Article 21 of the Constitution, which includes the right to privacy. तो अगर मान लीजिए कोई लॉ बना है जो आर्टिकल 21 में इंक्लूडेड एक राइट टू प्राइवेसी के कॉन्ट्रवेंशन में है, और उस लॉ में सिर्फ सेक्शन 11 और सेक्शन 5 ही कॉन्ट्रवीन कर रहे हैं, बाकी सारे जो सेक्शंस हैं, द रिमेनिंग सेक्शंस व्हिच आर गिवन इन द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, इन द लॉ, are all okay. They don't interfere or contravene the ideas of the Constitution, of the fundamental rights. Then what is meant by doctrine of severability is that the court will not strike down the entire law as such. It will not holistically strike down the entire law, saying that the entire law is unconstitutional. It will sever. Sever means it will in a way cut out the portion which is cancerous in a law, and then it will just push that portion out, but it will retain or redeem the entire structure of the law, which is healthy. It's like surgery. Okay, if there's a part of the body which has been infected by a tumor, the idea of a surgery is to just remove that tumor out but not hurt the entire body of the structure. So severance in English language means to take something out which is, let's say for example, undesirable, but leave the entire structure intact. So this is basically what is meant by doctrine of severability. Now this is what is basically an attachment with judicial review under Article 12. Article 12 judicial review states that if, let's say for example, a law has been made by the Parliament, Article 12, Article 13 says that if a law has been made by the Parliament and if that law is violating fundamental rights of an individual, then only the portion of the law which is violating the fundamental rights shall be struck down. And the judge should try to save the broader statute. It should not declare the entire statute is unconstitutional because a part of that is violating a fundamental right. Okay, so this is basically what is known as the doctrine of severability. I'll come to other doctrines as the connection between the concepts, etc. I hear you, doctrine of colorable legislation, etc. Please just wait for me as the suitable framework comes for it. I will explain to you in context as to what is meant by the doctrine of colorable legislation, eclipse, pith and substance, etc. So I'll try to finish as many doctrines as possible by the end of the session today. Okay, because this is a relevant concern in the prelims examination. The names of the doctrines can be directly asked. Okay. Right. Fine. Now we move on to the next part, which is we have understood Article 12, which is state. We've understood Article 13, which is judicial review and doctrine of severability. We are moving to the first set of fundamental rights, Article 14 and Article 18. Article 14 to Article 18, and I'll list it out very simply for you to get a sense of it. Okay. Sometimes a question is asked, for example, in the prelims examination in one of the previous years, a question was asked from the prelims, from the fundamental rights about what you can take a look at. Let's say the categories of fundamental rights. So for example, let's say if I move to this part, the index, you can very clearly identify what I'm covering over here. You have part 3, which is fundamental rights. You have the definition of state that we have covered, and you have laws inconsistent with or derogation of the fundamental rights, which is judicial review that we have covered, right? So at this point of time, my intention is to make sure that you have, for example, let's say the structure of the constitution, the preamble, the land, which is territory, union and its territory, and citizenship, which is the people of India, and then you have the state. This is a component of a government, and along with state but separated from is the judiciary, right? So this part we have covered. So even if you're revising all your subjects in terms of etc., you should have a kind of a structural understanding of the constitution. This will help you. I will explain to you later as a part of a revision. Okay. So now we come to the next part, which is the fundamental rights given under Article 14 onwards.